Hey, this is Waylon from Swiftwood Bows. Welcome to part 10.
I decided to do one last little thing before I did the rest of the finish work. Um, when the string is lying along this recurve here, um, it really honestly is going to be fine if it was just laying on this relatively flat surface here. But it's nice to have a little bit of added assurance by putting kind of a track through the wood here for the string to lay in, just to keep everything lined up and make it easy when you're stringing the bow, that the string isn't slipping off one way or the other. So I'm just going to take a rounded file and start making a channel here for the string to lay in. It doesn't have to be a whole lot. Some people like to make it really narrow, like the same, width as the string pretty much, and that works fine. I don't always particularly like the way it looks. I feel like sometimes it kind of breaks up the flow of the bow a little bit, and so I've kind of done a little bit more of a hollow section here with a wider track, and have kind of more flowing edges on it, and I feel like it looks a little bit better. So what I did was, when I had the bow strung, I marked where the last contact point with the string was, and I also have these kind of blackish wax marks left over from the string rubbing on the bow, so I can go by that too. I can follow the line of where the string comes out of the string groove and meets to go down the belly of the bow. So I'm just gonna work those in, and of course I'll have to resand that area when I'm finished with this work, but I feel like it's going to add to the bow overall. And so I'm going to use, I know this is overkill, but this part out here gives me about the right diameter for the channel that I'd like to make. I don't know how well you can see that, but like I said, it's bigger than the bowstring, but I feel like it creates a little bit more of a nicer flow on the bow to have it be a little bit bigger. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes shaping this. This thing's not quite sure how I want to do this here. Alright, let's get it started. So the main thing is that you have it lined up straight, that it's not going off to one side or the other, and that it's going to match where the string actually lays on the recurve. So it's going to go from about here where the string makes contact out to here where it stops making contact and leaves the bow. So I'm just going to kind of take my time and really get the track going straight at first before I start really hogging into it. I'm not going to make you watch me do this whole thing. I'm going to get it done and I'll show you the results when I'm finished.
Well, I've got some work done since the last time we saw each other. I added some copperhead skins to the back of the bow, and I didn't detail that process in this series because I've already got a video up that shows the detailed process of putting on a snake skin, and you're welcome to follow along with that if you want to add skins to your bow. I didn't want to be too redundant. So I've got them all glued down and trimmed up, and I've resanded the areas that might have gotten a little scratched up during that process, and I've got everything really smooth. I've got my little string grooves here that I made before. And I've also done a lot of shooting and checking the tiller, and this is my, before I put finish on the bow, this is my opportunity to make sure that everything is just right. I've probably shot a good 200 arrows through the bow, and I've really analyzed the tiller in detail and made sure that I like how it's bending and I like how it's shooting, and everything is looking pretty good. It's probably about 58 pounds now at 28 inches, which is still, you know, within what my customer wanted, and you know, it dropped a little bit of weight through that shooting and final tillering process, which is something that you should expect. So if you're really wanting to get a certain weight on your bow, make sure that you shoot a couple pounds high and expect that it's going to settle in a little bit as you're shooting it in. So my next step is going to be to put a arrow rest on the bow. I don't do cut-in shelves on my bows. It's just not the style I like to go with on a self bow. Some people do, but it's not what I do. If I have a shelf, I mean, honestly, I really like shooting off my hand. Bows that I've been making for myself lately, I've just been shooting off the back of my hand, and I like the simplicity of that. But a lot of people like shelves, and that's fine, and so what I do is a glue-on shelf. So I've got this piece of Osage that I'm going to use my belt sander and shape into an arrow rest, and I'm going to glue it on the side of my handle here. This bow is for a right-hander, so he'll be holding it with his left hand, so the rest needs to be on this side here. I'm going to take a file, and I'm going to gently flatten off a spot here to make a good mating surface for the glue, and then I'm going to use my belt sander to shape this down into an arrow rest shape. Something that I've used in the past that works really well for arrow rest, and I use it every once in a while still, is a golf tee, a wooden golf tee, and it already comes in the basic shape of an arrow rest. You just have to grind down about half of it, make the top flat, and glue it on, and then, you know, scrape away a little extra wood, and it makes a perfectly good arrow rest. It was a trick that I learned from John Strunk. But I was just going for a little bit of added durability with this tough Osage wood. So I'm going to get the arrow rest shaped up, I'm going to get this file down, and then we'll glue that on, and we'll move on to the next step. We're getting really close. This bow's ready to do just the final decorations and start putting some finish on there. I'm getting excited. Okay, I've got my piece of Osage shaped, and I've got this flat spot here scraped off on the side of my handle. So now I'm just going to use some gel super glue and a clamp to put that in its place. And then once it's dry, I'm going to take a file and even reduce that even more, so that, you know, there's still that whole length of surface area contact, but it's going to be really, the profile is going to be really low, so it's not going to bulge up except up here where the arrow is going to rest, just to help keep it minimal and not so bulky. It'll look nicer that way. Alright, I'll show you what it looks like when it's all finished. So I've got the arrow rest on there now. Doesn't look super pretty around that area, but it's okay because it's all going to get covered up by a leather handle wrap. But the important thing is that it is securely glued on there, and that it's going to feel nice in the hand. So with that in place, I can focus on finishing the bow. So pretty much all that I've got left to do before I put the True Oil, which is the product that I use to finish my bows, onto the bow is, I don't know if you can see, I used some stain underneath this copperhead skin just to make sure that the white from the sapwood wasn't just going to wash out the colors. And so you can see right along the edge there's a little bit of the stain showing, and I don't think it looks very nice. So I'm going to do what I do with a lot of my bows that have skins on them, and I'm going to paint a thin line down the edge of that to create a transition between the skin and the bow, and it really helps the skin stand out. So that's going to be my next step, is to paint that line along the edge of the skins. I'm going to use some acrylic paint, and then I'm going to put my maker's mark on the bow, and I'm going to write down the draw weight and the draw length with a pen. And once I've got those in place, then I'm going to start putting the True Oil on the bow, and I'll show you my process for that. But we're getting close. I've got all of the decorations done. I put a line along the edge of the skins with some dots on it. I just did that with acrylic paint and a small paintbrush and a little bit of patience. Got my maker's mark stamped on there, and with a micron pen I wrote the draw weight and draw length on there. So the only things left for this bow are putting on the finish, and then putting on a leather handle wrap. That's always my last step. So I'm going to show you what I do to put a good finish on the bow using True Oil, which is a product of, I think, Birch Casey. It's used for a gun stock finish. It's boiled linseed oil based with some drying agents in it so that it doesn't take forever to dry. And I put it on with my finger. I've found that I've got the most control using my finger, and the real trick to putting on a good finish is not putting too much on there in one go. I'm going to do 8 coats of True Oil, but each coat's going to be pretty thin. If your coats are not thin, then you're going to get runs and drips, and it's not going to look good. Believe me, I've done it before. When I first started using True Oil, I was always putting it on too heavy, and I was always dealing with runs and drips, and I've learned to be much more sparing with it and just build up the finish with multiple coats. So I get a bigger container of the True Oil and I split it up into some smaller containers so that it doesn't dry out on me so fast. And I've also found the nice thing about these smaller containers is I used to pour a little bit of the True Oil into like a little plastic cup and just dip my finger in there, which works fine, but I felt like I ended up wasting a bunch of True Oil every time because I could never get the exact amount that I wanted in there. So I've kind of developed this new technique. I have this little glass bottle with just a small amount of True Oil in there. I put my finger on it, I tip it so I get some on my finger, and then I've got just the right amount to start putting on the bow. And now you can see I'm really making that little bit go pretty far. You know, with this first coat, there's going to be grain showing through some places. It's not going to be like a perfect coat, but it's just to get it started. And I'm really using my finger like a squeegee and just pushing all that true oil down the bow. I always start on the back, and then I do the sides, and then I do the belly, all of one limb, and that's just my system. You don't necessarily have to do it that way, but works good for me. I just slowly work my way down. I don't normally do this outside. It's probably not the best idea in the world, but today the air is clean, it's been raining, so there's not a lot of stuff floating around, but I normally do it inside. I just did it out here for better lighting, for your benefit. I'm always careful out at the tips. It's easy to overload it with too much true oil out here, and that's a common place for the true oil to start to run. So I'm pretty sparing, and like I said, I'm gonna get full coverage over time as I put multiple coats on, so I'm not worried too much about getting a beautiful coat the first time, because if you do that, you're going to overload it. You didn't tired of me here? Are you tired of me saying that already? Now I'm going to turn the bow and do the sides. Make sure you're not neglecting the edge. Alright, now that I've done all four sides on this limb, I'm going to hold it up to the sunlight, and I'm really going to take a good look at each side, and the sunlight will really help you catch any runs or drips that you might have left. But if you put it on sparingly and you really worked it in there good, chances are you won't see any. If you're seeing quite a few runs or drips when you do this, it means that you put too much on, and you need to wipe some of it off. So I'm going to do the other side the exact same way, and then I'm going to set it up with a clamp somewhere out of the way inside for it to dry overnight, and then I'll put another coat on every day for 8 days, and I will rub it down with some 4/0 steel wool between the coats, just to knock off any debris that got stuck on there and help keep it smooth as I go along. You can also take some like 600 grit sandpaper every few coats, and just give it a really light sanding. If you do that, you got to be careful that you're not hitting the edges too hard, because it's really easy to cut down through the finish even with that fine of a grit. and your goal is just to knock that debris off, not to really dig down through the finish, because you're trying to build up the layers. So after I get my 8 coats on here, I will show you how I polish the final coat of True Oil to give it a nice satin sheen, so that it's not really glossy and glassy. And some people like it that way, and that's fine. But I like to dull it down a little bit and make it really smooth. So I'll show you my process for that.